Hello Stockland Green, and welcome to an extra assembly that we've decided to record in response to some current events, as I'm sure many of you are all aware of the events surrounding the death of George Floyd. And to begin with, I would like to make it really clear from the outset that I'm not suggesting for a moment that I understand the way that some of you are feeling or that I feel the same way, because it would be wrong of me to do so, because my experience is going to be completely different to that of some of yours. However, it is something that I value and that our school values, to show empathy and to be a person of integrity. And I think in order to do that, we have to address this issue. And so I'm going to take you through an assembly alongside Miss Sims, and it's going to be very much based on informing you about what has happened and hopefully giving you the opportunity to share how you are feeling about these events. So I think it's best to start with some context, to start with what exactly happened in the death of George Floyd that has sparked this sort of worldwide protest movement. So on the 25th of May, Minneapolis police officers arrested George Floyd after he was accused of buying cigarettes with a fake $20 bill. During the arrest, a police officer called Derek Chauvin, who was a white man, kept his knee on the side of Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while Floyd was handcuffed and lying face down. During the last 3 minutes, George Floyd was not moving at all, and 3 more officers who were involved in the arrest stopped him from moving further and prevented people looking on who tried to stop them from doing so. Now, obviously, this is an absolutely heinous crime. There's no doubt about that. There is no way that a police officer should ever behave in that manner that Derek Chauvin did, regardless of what a suspect is charged with. And that's the first and most obvious thing here. And as we go through the PowerPoint, I'll try to sort of unpack a few more elements of this situation and why I think this situation has been such a catalyst for, rightly, sort of anger and dismay on the part of many people all across the world. One of the things that I know makes me particularly angry about the situation is the conduct of the police officer himself. So, for instance, first of all, the way that he chose to restrain a suspect, a man who is already handcuffed, is being knelt upon, and there's a number of really troubling things about that. I mean, first of all, as you can see on the screen, there's no suggestion that the police advocate that as a way of restraining people. And second of all, there are 4 police officers there. There's absolutely no need to restrain a person in that way. And that's what's really troubling about this for me. It suggests that the officer wanted to do that. That the officer wanted to do that to sort of humiliate and degrade George Floyd to some degree. And equally, he knew that doing this in broad daylight, he thought he would get away with it. And that's a thing that is particularly troubling. And when we look at the idea that he thought he could get away with it, actually, this same police officer has been involved in police actions that have led to the death of at least 5 people. He's participated in 2 fatal shootings, and he has also participated in a car chase that led to the deaths of 3 people who were in the car that was being pursued. And equally, he's had 18 complaints made about him during his time as a police officer, with only 2 resulting in any action being taken against him. And I think that's one of the major sources of anger in this case, the fact that he was clearly not a good police officer, and he was allowed to continue not being a good police officer and being essentially a criminal in uniform for many years in that job, with very little done to deter him. Now, obviously, in response, people across the world have been protesting. People have been protesting in America, in Australia, in New Zealand, in England, and murals depicting George Floyd have been seen in places as far away as Syria. Now, the protests have been largely peaceful, but there have been incidences of violence from both the police and the protesters. So the police have, particularly in America, used tear gas, used rubber bullets, and used very kind of aggressive tactics to subdue the protesters. And it's also clear that some groups have used the protest as an opportunity for looting and destruction. And these are people who are not protesting in George Floyd's name in any way. And in fact, his family have come out and said they do not want this. They believe in the principle of peaceful, non-violent protest. And it's also clear that some people are sort of using the protest to further a political agenda that isn't an agenda of equality and sort of justice. And although it's George Floyd's death that has sparked the protest, the true cause is many underlying problems, including something called structural racism. And I'm going to try to explain that to you on the next slide, because I think that's a really key thing to understand. So obviously most of us could say what racism is, and most of us know when we see it. And equally, when things happen like what happened to George Floyd, everyone in their right mind is appalled by it and is disgusted by it and is sort of can't imagine why a person would behave in that manner. But structural racism is a different thing that needs to be addressed. And I think this is actually one of the reasons that people have become so angry at George Floyd's death. So on the board, you can see a definition of structural racism, and that comes from a report into the death of Stephen Lawrence, when it found that at the time, many institutions in Britain were structurally racist. So what that means is that the way an organisation or circumstance is set up amounts to discrimination, and that can be, as you can see on the slide, through prejudice, through ignorance of not understanding what other people are like, or willfully not understanding what other people are like, through thoughtlessness, and through racist stereotyping. And all of these things together end up disadvantaging minority ethnic people. Now, I've put a couple of images on the board that I think illustrate a really small element of this. So you can see the Band-Aid advert, and the little girl is wearing a plaster that's clearly not the same colour as her skin, like most plasters aren't. And in another picture there, I've got a picture that a photographer took for the Oprah Winfrey magazine, and I've used this in an assembly before. And it's a white girl in a toy shop looking at racks and racks and racks of black dolls. And actually, we all know that the reverse is true. If we go into a toy shop, we're going to see far more white dolls than we're going to see black or Asian or dolls of any other ethnicity. And this is one of the most sort of insidious and sad things about structural racism, because you're being told in some way that you are less important, that you are less than people who are different than you, that you're in some way less valuable, and the world is not set up to cater for you. And you see that in many ways. You see that in sort of access to healthcare. You see that in access to education, employment statistics, criminal justice outcomes, interactions with the police. You see it in many ways. And one of the most extreme ways in which you see it is the frequent, in America, interaction between black people and minority ethnic people and the police, leading to the loss of their lives. And it's very hard to not think in some way that those lives are considered less important by significant people in power. And we sort of need to talk now about what can be done about that, and what sort of must be done about that, really. So I've returned here to the Stockland Green Standard for a moment, and you see there, show empathy by listening, being open and offering help, act with integrity by keeping your word and being honest. And I think a real important thing to take from recent events is the fact that simply not being a racist and not doing racist things is not enough. It's necessary for people to be actively anti-racist, for people to challenge prejudice, and to sort of do whatever they can to try and bring about a situation of equality.
Hi, Stockland Green. I want to talk to you about empathy and experience. The lady who you're about to hear in this video is Jane Elliott. She's an American school teacher and an anti-racism activist. She's best known for an experiment that she did with her students in 1968 on the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. The experiment was known as Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, and actually caused quite a bit of controversy for her because she asked her students to reflect on their learnings in written form, and then those writings were actually published in a local newspaper, which meant that what they had been learning about and the content of those lessons reached a far wider audience than just the normal academic classroom and school environment. And there was quite a bit of uproar about what she was teaching these children, these very white privileged children, because it was thought that actually they had no need to understand or experience what it felt like to be a black child. Thankfully, their efforts were unsuccessful, and actually she still works as a public speaker and political activist today. But you'll hear in the video that she tries to make it clear that empathy and experience are not the same. However, you don't have to have directly experienced something to understand that it's not acceptable. You don't have to have experienced something to understand that actually it can make somebody feel unequal and that you very much wouldn't want to experience it for yourself. Therefore, empathy in this instance is knowing that something is not right and actually doing something about it because you understand that feeling even if you haven't actually directly experienced it yourself.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
So what is Black Lives Matter and why is it so important? It's an organisation and a movement that was founded in 2013 following the murder of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, or more specifically following the acquittal of his murderer based on him stating that actually it was self-defence. It's a global organisation who have built up their mission of stamping out white supremacy, particularly within governments and within institutions and organisations and vigilante groups. They really want to come together to develop this idea that actually Black lives matter as much as everybody else's, and it's not just a case of saying that everybody's lives matter, and I want to talk about that more in just a moment. But actually it's really important that we acknowledge and accept that although this movement has brought us really very far on from where we were even just a few years ago, actually their mission is not yet complete because Black lives are not still valued as equal in the same way as white people's. So why then is this response of all lives matter particularly unhelpful? Nobody at all is trying to suggest that white lives are not as important as black lives, or that black lives are more important than anybody else's. That's not what the movement is about. It's about the idea that black people, particularly as a group, are being treated still hundreds of years later, being treated as unequal. And so very much it is a case of focusing on Black Lives Matter specifically at the moment because they are the group that is being targeted. I'm hoping that this cartoon here can demonstrate it in a far more eloquent way than maybe I have, but actually it's really important that we think it's no one's shutting you down from saying that other people's lives matter just as much and other people's lives are just as important. They are. Everybody's lives are important, but right now the target has to specifically be on the importance of Black lives and why they matter so much.
I've got some guidance here about some of the things that you guys might like to do in order to sort of get involved in a productive and peaceful way. So you can donate to the George Floyd Memorial Fund if you wish, to sort of help his family to deal with this crisis, and I'm sure they will be doing other work in his name. There are a number of charities such as Stop Hate UK and Show Racism the Red Card that you can engage with on social media. Equally, the Stephen Lawrence Trust provides a tremendous amount of work in sort of challenging racism and educating people to understand how to try and eradicate this problem. And there's a charity at the bottom called SARI, and that basically provides support for people who've been victims of racist violence or hate-based violence of any kind, actually. And something that really stands out to me, to go back to the message that I gave you before of it's not really acceptable to stand by and not challenge those who are behaving in a way that mustn't happen, is this quite famous piece of writing from a man called Martin Niemöller, who was a priest in Nazi Germany, and initially he actually supported the Nazis. And it says, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And I think that's really, really important. The idea is, when we look back at George Floyd's death, ultimately, the police in America, or the police anywhere in the world, are there to sort of maintain law and order and protect people. And every single person in the world, regardless of their race or religion or creed, has an interest in seeing that justice is done and that the world is a fair and well-governed place. And that's why, whatever your race is, racism, prejudice, inequality, discrimination are things that it is your duty to challenge, because we're all kind of in this together in many respects, and it's very, very important that prejudice is not unchallenged. Now, there's one final thing that I would include. Is a great thing to do at this point in time is to educate yourself about this situation.
So there's lots of ways that you can get involved and have your say and let your voice be heard on social media, and of course looking at the writing and the works of people who have previously gone before you. But what can you do specifically right now? You'll have heard on the news that there's lots of protests that are happening around England and the world on the whole. And if you want to go and get involved in a protest, that is your right. You absolutely have the right to do that. But I implore you to really have a think about social distancing guidelines. You'll hear from Assistant Chief Constable Matt Ward here for West Midlands Police, where he's saying they absolutely understand that it is right to stand up. They're actually standing alongside you in trying to combat this institutionalised racism for particularly what has happened to George Floyd. However, we are in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and it is very, very important that you think, if you are going to go and you are going to publicly protest, which you are more than welcome to do, please do it safely. Please remember to stay those 2 metres apart from each other. Please remember some of those crucial social distancing guidelines to really make sure you're looking after the health and safety of yourself, your family, and the other people who are there at the protest.
I, like many people, watched the awful video of the death of George Floyd. And like many people, not only in the United States, but across the world, I was saddened, I was frustrated, I was angry, I was shocked by what I saw. And within West Midlands Police, we recognise that, and we recognise there'll be lots of emotions by many people who feel moved by what they saw and want to express their frustrations and protest around how they see people being treated by police forces in other countries. So the right to protest is probably one of the most fundamental human rights that we have in this country. And from West Midlands Police's point of view, we want to make sure that people are able to protest about the things which they are passionate and care about. So we're going to work as hard as we can with the organisers, with protesters, with groups, to make sure that where protests are planned, they can be conducted, they are safe, and they are peaceful. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected the whole country and everybody within the West Midlands. And it's really important, as people start to protest, we don't lose sight of the fact that the coronavirus is still present and a danger and threat to us all. So we're going to make sure we continue to work with the protest organisers and the protest groups to ensure they continue to adhere to the social distancing rules, which are so important for keeping us all safe. Our aim, though, is to allow and to facilitate peaceful protest, and therefore we are not going to stop people coming out onto the streets if they've got legitimate concerns they want to share.
And maybe actually you don't want to go and get involved in a public protest. That's okay too. Maybe you want to do something at home. Maybe you want to come from a more informed opinion because maybe this is the first time that you've really thought that it is a problem. I've had a conversation with my 9-year-old son this morning about it, having watched the news. And he said to me, "But mummy, I thought we'd combated this problem. I thought it was over." And actually I had to say to him that whilst he's lovely and whilst he's very, very kind, actually it's being very naive to think that it's over. This battle is still ongoing and we need to make sure we're informed enough to know what we can do about it. This next slide then actually shows you exactly what you can do about it. I've given you the ample opportunity here to do some research into the great and wonderful things that Black Lives have given us in the past. It's entirely up to you whether you want to take on one of these tasks, whether you want to do 2, 3, or whether actually you want to be really, really informed and do them all. Because as Mr. McCarthy said earlier, and I'm very much paraphrasing here, it's not enough to do nothing. Actually, you have to do something. You have to make sure that you are doing something to actively stop racism, and you have to be anti-racist. And the best way to do that is to be informed and to be educated, because knowledge is power. And of course, I couldn't come to you from a B2A perspective without talking about the importance of practicing self-care. Mental health is at an all-time high in terms of anxiety, depression, and real serious mental health issues because of what is going on in the outside world. We're all actively staying in our very safe little bubbles at home, but actually what's happening in the wider world is really causing our mental health and anxiety to kind of skyrocket and go through the roof. So it's really important to look after yourselves as well. Something that I'm a big advocate for is taking a social media break. Many of you will have seen that I'm tweeting every single day, multiple times a day from B2A, and that's important and that's the right thing to do. However, because of how active I am on Twitter, I've come off all other forms of social media platforms because I was very aware that A, my phone was in my hand an awful lot, and also that actually I've just got all of this media and news and propaganda and thoughts and opinions all flying at me from different angles. So it was time to take a break in the best way possible. That still left me being able to talk to you through B2A's Twitter account. Accept your feelings and reactions. They're happening to you, you're experiencing them, and it's time to really take them on board and to actually acknowledge them rather than just trying to keep them bottled up inside, because that's really only going to go one way and will leave you kind of fizzing over with this anger that will probably come out in a very aggressive and violent format. So try to accept them, which will allow you to channel your frustrations in a far more positive manner. Talk to the people you live with, talk to your extended family, talk to your friends online, talk to us at school. We're always happy to listen to these conversations. The next slide will actually show you some of the conversations that I've been having with either some of you or some of your peers from within our cohort about this very issue. So please do get in touch with us, talk to us about it. And as we've already mentioned, read, listen, be informed about some of the very, very great things that Black people have given us. Blackness is wonderful and it is time to celebrate it rather than still trying to find a reason to oppress it. So as I've already said, this slide talks to you directly from our students' mouths. These are some amazing quotes that I've been privy to over kind of the last few hours today. They are lengthy, some of them, but they are wonderful. So I'm just going to abridge some of them so I can give you a bit of an overview. He couldn't breathe, but we can, and we must use our voice to make a difference. Lots of people are signing petitions. I signed one about including more relevant Black history into the whole school curriculum. We're tired of being tired. People need to acknowledge white privilege and realise that being pro-Black is not being anti-white. George Floyd was targeted by police because of the colour of his skin, and they used excessive force on him, and even when he was saying he couldn't breathe, they applied more pressure and ended up killing him. Everybody needs to come together and recognise that racism is wrong and not be ignorant to the fact that Black people are the ones most at risk right now. We can use social media, peaceful protests, campaigns and banners to advertise and show people that we can come together as one and teach people as well. He was an unarmed man who was killed by a police officer who knelt on his neck for 9 minutes. It happened because the police officers are trained in fear. Can you imagine Trafalgar Square with everyone at 2 meters apart? It would send an amazing message to people in power because everyone can be stood apart but still stand together. Racism is not right. We should all be treated equally. Seeing this has made me want to pay attention to the next time there is an election and really look at what each person stands for and believes. That final quote is absolutely the pinnacle of what I've just been saying to you about be informed, be educated. That young person has seen what is happening and has really thought, I need to make a difference and I need to make sure that moving forward, I know exactly what I'm believing in, what I'm having faith in and what I'm voting for fundamentally. Thank you so much to all of our students who have given me these quotes to share and to their families who have really discussed this with them. And thank you to all of you. Please do take care. Please do stay safe.
I've prepared, predictably, some further reading for you. Now, I've got 3 different things that you could read, and you're just dipping a toe into this by doing that, but I think it's a good starting point. So, the first is a book by a man called Akala, called Natives, and I believe many years ago he actually visited our school and gave a talk, and I read this book a couple of years ago, and basically it explains the history of race relations in Britain and what we could do to change things and make Britain a fairer and more just place. Now, the second book that I've chosen is a novel, and I've chosen that because I read this book again a couple of years ago, and the book deals with a teenager in the aftermath of an incident of police brutality and unlawful police killing. And I have to say, in terms of the feelings that are presented in the book, I think the exploration of the characters' feelings is incredible. Really moving. I don't mind telling you actually that I cried several times whilst reading this book, because it was that moving and that sort of anger provoking in a way. But I think it also shows that ultimately anger and violence will not solve anything, because the way that the character ends up making a difference is through a productive and peaceful sort of way of doing things. And finally, I've got a tweet from Barack Obama there. So Barack Obama made an excellent post this week about how this moment can actually become a turning point for change. And again, it provides a lot of education about what a person could learn about in order to be well informed in the future and to help them to kind of perhaps suggest solutions to some of these problems. But it also gives guidance about how some people might choose to become involved. So in terms of a moment of reflection for today's assembly, what I would like you to do really is think about what you can do to uphold the rights that this assembly is about with our rights respecting school agenda. So we want to have a principle of non-discrimination. What can I do to ensure that perhaps I'm not discriminatory and certainly that I'm not discriminatory, but what can I do to safely and productively challenge discrimination? And also Article 42, knowledge. How can I better educate myself to help myself and my community? Okay, take care and stay safe. Goodbye.